Hello, everybody. This is Brendan Kenny from Minneapolis, giving a retrospective on Serial. I'm on Twitter at KENNYBRENDAN, at KENNYBRENDAN. And I guess you're all joining now. At any point during this, please feel free to share this. I was going to show you how to share it, and I don't remember. What I'm going to do with questions is feel free to ask your questions if you want now or later, and I'll try to make a note of them and get to them, because I find it kind of breaks the continuity of this thing if I try to answer it as we go. I will say in response to the first question that there is no word that I'm aware of when Serial Season 2 is coming out. I'm very interested in it since I'm starting a podcast that's going to be following it, among other things. So it was going to be called the Serial Lawyer Podcast, but I think we'll have to take serial out of the title and maybe make it something else and say, podcast with the most serial you can have without having it in the title, because our lawyers won't let us. Anyway, without putting that out right now, I think I'll get to probably what most of you are here for. And my idea was, with Season 2 starting, it just seems like a good time for all of us to just think back on what Serial Season 1 meant. So this is going to have a bit of a personal feel to it. I hope it's not too personal, but the show really changed me in a lot of ways. It helped me see a lot about life, and I think that's what art and stories are about. It takes things that happen in life, puts it in a sort of really heightened, encapsulated form, and teaches me at least things that I wouldn't learn if it was a real story. So let's start out with the song. Remember hearing this for the first time? Let me turn it up. It takes a little bit. Oh.
This is a Global Cal-Link prepaid call from
Adnan Sayed,
an inmate at the Maryland Correctional Facility.
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial, one story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig.
Yes, so that's what started it all off, and every time I hear that, I try to remember what it was like to hear that for the first time, and everything that was going to happen, the story we were going to be told. And I should say, for those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer and trial lawyer, and so I think a lot about storytelling. And frankly, I learned so much more about storytelling as a lawyer by studying journalists, writers, singers, that's not the word, right? I mean, songwriters, musicians, singers. That's like when I was a kid, I remember someone was saying that his dad was a thrower in football in high school. Quarterback, but thrower, so that's almost as bad. Anyway, so I learned so much more about being a good lawyer from them in many cases than I do from lawyers. My boss being a very notable exception. He's a tremendous trial lawyer. But she did such a good job framing the whole thing, and I love how she frames what the story's about in about a sentence. It's not really what the story's about, but it was the story that the prosecution gave. So let's listen to that, if you don't mind.
Asked if I would please just take a look at Adnan's case. I don't get emails like this every day, so I thought, sure, why not? I read a few newspaper clips about the case, looked up a few trial records, and on paper, the case was like a Shakespearean mashup. Young lovers from different worlds, thwarting their families, secret assignations, jealousy, suspicion, and honor besmirched. The villain, not a Moor exactly, but a Muslim all the same.
Wow. I mean, it's one of those things that I really picked up on that when, in preparing for this, I was going through the transcripts, because I had recently listened to Serial again, and those are some of the things that hit me. But when I read that on paper, I thought, the writing in this is tremendous, and that is a tremendous... I mean, the thing is that is so much better of representing what the prosecution was trying to say than the prosecution did. That was the story they were trying to tell, and because she is such a fabulous narrator, she told the story there. It was a mix of Romeo and Juliet and Othello. And the thing about not a Moor, but a Muslim nonetheless. That's what's so beautiful and subtle about this show. It plants a seed for a theme that's going to be coming throughout. Adnan is the outsider. Adnan is the other. Adnan is the person that isn't enough apart. Let's say Jay. Let's say, assuming it was the case that he ratted him out and made it all up or whatever. Adnan that wasn't enough a part of Jay's world to warrant Jay's loyalty. And I'm not going to get too much on my own theories, but many of you have followed along on Undisclosed and Serial Dynasty, the podcast that followed Serial. And what struck me getting deeper into the case, more into the weeds, and it comes out in Serial as well as we get farther along when she talks about Jay. Jay has a tremendous sense of his own honor. And it always struck me as odd that this guy with a sense of honor, that at the time one of the most popular songs in Baltimore was that rap song Don't Snitch. How did he justify, regardless of what happened, what he did to Adnan? And I think it was because Adnan's this other guy. He doesn't really fit into Jay's world. And so that comment, that seeming throwaway line about not a Moor but a Muslim nonetheless, it's just brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And this isn't the first episode. This is in, the first few minutes of it. I mean, she just dropped this thing like wild. So, and what I'm kind of doing with this is I'm just going through clips and riffing off those so we can experience in that together. So hopefully that's okay for you guys. All right. We are at, the next one is, this is a good one. This is a really good one.
She writes about Adnan. Quote, I swear he's the sweetest guy. Let me tell you why.
Okay. That moment was so great because Sarah's talking about how Hayes' diary is such a teenage diary. And it's talking about that song, and it has a song lead out. And what struck me about that hit me when I heard it for the first time and after, was that not only does music have a power, good music, bad music, whatever way you look at it. Plato said that music has the biggest effect on our children over anything. So he, in his Republic, that sounds really dystopian, he said, we're only going to have military marching music. Or at least Socrates said that. And regardless, that's what came out in the Republic. And so I've always thought about that. And when I think about that song, what's so powerful about the song, because I remember I was in high school around the same time. I graduated in 98 in a very different setting. But there are songs that I have from high school that aren't as good music as I listen to now, and in a way don't touch me the way that the music I listen to now, but touch a kind of special part of me. That brings me back to that moment. And those sorts of memories, those sorts of songs are irreplaceable. For me, it wasn't that song. It was Live and Counting Crows and a few other things. But and so when I listen to those again, there's a sense that it brings back that's like nothing else, like no other music. And so I just thought that was brilliantly done, and I don't think they really had to craft that right to get that right. And I think it sets the tone for me for everything she talks about Hay. She leads in, she gets that song, and that captures Hay's emotions and how she was feeling. It's brilliant. There's one thing that I missed about Adnan, a clip that's a little earlier in time, but I want to play it right now. I call it the look into my brain clip. We've already been touching upon memory with that song, and the idea at the very beginning, as she talks about in the episode about these high school kids that can't remember what they did unless it's something memorable. And this is memory, but this is also the way that the internal disposition of me, what's going on inside of me. On one hand, people on the outside really can't access, and I can't really show. So that creates such misunderstanding and frustration. And here's what Adnan has to say with it.
I just sometimes wish like they could like look into my brain and see how I really felt about it. And no matter what else someone would say, they would see, man, this guy had no ill will towards it. Whatever the motivation is to kill someone, it didn't exist in me. You know what I mean? No one can ever say why.
Yeah, no one can ever say why. And if they could only get into his brain, if we could only get into there, let's put it this way, if he could only take what's going on inside and have an objective representation that other people could see, this would never have happened. But he can't. So that part of the human condition, and as a lawyer, it's such a frustration for me, both getting into opposing counsel's brain, another witness, getting into my own witness's brain, and trying to figure out a way to present that to the other side, to the judge, to the jury. And that's just a part of life. It's a frustration in marriage and lots of places, and that runs throughout. That there's a necessity to be an evidence gatherer, to be really good at that, and if you can do that, hopefully that will present enough evidence where people can come to the conclusion about what's going on internally in this person that you want them to. But in this case, as we go throughout Serial, that's not there because there isn't the evidence, supposedly. And so that's another theme that runs throughout that struck me. We have the All My Life song, and then we have Prom.
Now, compare that with how Adnan's best friend Saad remembers the homecoming debacle.
Homecoming.
He comes home at like 11 p.m. or like 12 midnight, and I'm like, what happened at your homecoming? And he's like, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what? He's like, my mom and my dad showed up. And I'm like, what? And I mean, we're dying laughing on the phone about this. This is our world. And I'm like, what happened? They're like,
So, this again is, right, the prosecution's theme, as Sarah put it much better than they did at the beginning, was these star-crossed lovers, and Adnan in this Othello-like character putting everything on the line and being jilted and not being able to handle it, and supposedly they're saying in his mind is playing back this event as he's strangling her, and then to have Saad say, no, that's not how it went down at all. We were laughing about it afterwards. It's really remarkable. And I would say, I don't mean to get too opinionated, but I find, when I look at these cases, especially criminal cases, and I don't work in criminal cases, I'm on the civil side, mostly representing Fortune 500 companies in mass torts, class action, product liability cases. Different, though involving serious things, people injured, things like that. But this arrogance, I almost think, that I've seen these criminal cases where the prosecutor's telling everybody what was going on in the defendant's mind and the jury, and somehow the jury isn't offended by it. I mean, it would offend me. Like, how do you know? It's remarkable, and just in this case, there was so little pushback, unfortunately, on the other side by the lawyer, by Christina Gutierrez, which I will talk about later. But she didn't succeed at all in creating any kind of persuasive counter narrative. So she was stuck with saying, that's not true, and that was really the best, because there wasn't any, as far as I could see, and I don't know that I read every page of the transcripts, there wasn't any counter narrative like Saad is doing here, where he's saying this was not a big deal at all for him, and this is our world as immigrants. So that's in episode 2, and then in episode 3 we're introduced to Mr. S, and this is my favorite part about Mr. S. I might have to translate it because he's a little hard to understand, but here goes. This is about why he was in Lincoln Park, why he had to stop in Lincoln Park when he did.
I'd rather be on the refrigerator. It was a 20-ounce Budweiser, and I was drinking on my way back to school at Burgett, and I had to go to the bathroom, so I pulled over, and I went further in the woods to the one with the city urinating, and when I discovered what looked like was a body in the woods.
Yeah, it's hard to hear, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't smile because it involves him finding a body. I have not spoken to Mr. S. I haven't done any independent research. Someone asked if I've spoken to Mr. S. I've just been following along the podcast, and mostly I just take the information that's given to me and think about it and talk about it and say what maybe could have done, should have been done, and questions I'd ask, which is really all I'm doing. So I haven't done any independent stuff. But what's funny about that, and here's why it's interesting, in what Mr. S tells me is, and it's not just as a lawyer, I think a lot of us happen in life if we have children or coworkers, is that what people think is a good argument, a good explanation for why they did something varies greatly. So for him, so let's assume for a minute that it didn't happen exactly the way he said, meaning he didn't really stop at that point in Lincoln Park and urinate and see Hayes' body because he had to go back to his home to get a plane to cut because they didn't have one at work, and he decided to slam a tall can of Budweiser on the way back. So let's assume that's not what happened. It's really interesting that was the best story he came up with. You know, he thought that would be a good explanation, and it would be a better explanation than saying he was streaking, you know, or whatever was going on. But I found that really interesting. It says a lot about him. And just an anecdote that came to mind, maybe to give you an example of what I mean, is in a former life, before I was out here in Minnesota, I was in the Attorney General's office in California, and I was in the correctional law section. So we represented we represented the state and people employed by the state against lawsuits brought by inmates. So they could be class actions, they could be pro se ones where the inmate was representing themselves, or there could be one where the inmate had pro bono counsel. And I've talked about this case a lot, but in one case, he had pro bono counsel. And it was a complicated case. It didn't have to be, but it was a top 25 firm on the other side, and they had 5 lawyers on it. And anyway, so right before this guy's deposition that I was representing, he was a gang investigator, because this was part of it, what's called a gang validation investigation. He had mentioned to me, "Oh, call me at a different number because I'm no longer working in the gang unit." And this came out in the deposition, so I'm not talking out of school, it's public record. And he said to me before the deposition, he says, "Well, you know, I gotta say something about why I left the unit." I said, "Oh, why you left the unit?" He said, "Am I gonna have to talk about it?" I said, "Well, if the other side questions you about it, you will." And it all came out in the deposition, where what had happened was, as part of his duties in the gang unit, he has to review inmate mail, inmate correspondence. And there's one particular inmate that was still in touch with his wife and had something on the side, as prisoners do, with some girlfriend, all via mail. And the guy was getting quite hot and heavy with his girlfriend in correspondence. And so what this guy did, the investigator, is he switched the letters. So the letter that was supposed to be sent to the guy's girlfriend, he sent to his wife, and the letter the guy was trying to send to... In any event, I'm explaining it bad. The wife ended up with the letter that was intended for the girlfriend, and it caused some domestic intranquility, is the way I put it. And so the inmate filed what's called an inmate appeal, and it came out, and this gang investigator came clean. But where I'm going with this is, to the investigator, it was the most natural thing in the world to do. I mean, he felt bad about it. Yeah, so Shakespearean, right? Someone said, it was the most natural way to get even with the inmate, because this was a family man. He had 5 kids, faithful, religious, and this was the way you would even the score with an inmate who was wronging his wife. And so that's connected me with the Mr. S story. You know, this is the way I come up with a story to explain why I'm in the middle of Lincoln Park and find a dead body, and whatever really happened. I found that really interesting. There's also something, technique that Anand does a lot of, that people use that I like a lot. It's charming, and it's not something I think is negative. It's when you try to make a point that might seem offensive by saying you're not making that point. So here's the one, what I call the white people music clip. It's about Jay in episode 4.
Okay, I knew he generally kind of listened to, like, I don't want to say white people music, but he like listened to like rock and roll, things like that, like heavy metal. I guess, I can't really, I guess, just, I can't, to be honest with you, I couldn't even really recall, like, a huge, long conversation that we ever had other than, like, a specific subject. If you was asking me something about Stephanie or something like where we were going to go or, like, we're hanging out, we wouldn't necessarily, like, be kicking it per se, right?
So that's a great clip because you have the white people music thing and the kicking it per se thing. There's so much there. But I think the white people music thing is funny because it's actually a great piece of information to give about Jay. It tells you a lot about Jay that comes out later. Like, at least for me, I had a mental image of, oh, okay, I'm starting to get the idea of what he's doing. And someone else said, Dennis Rodman. And then how Adnan here, I say, is almost embarrassed to try to explain his relationship with Jay. And I think maybe around high school, or there's times in that in maybe people's lives, certainly in my life, when I look back and I try to explain a relationship I had with someone, a peer, and I can't explain kind of what was going on there, or what we were doing, or why I hung out with him. And that's the thing here. I don't think Adnan's being deceptive. He just can't really understand what was going on there. So there's just a lot of punch packed in that little snippet that I've always liked a lot. Okay, Mr. S's Budweiser. I'll open a few more of these things. And I'm just going through some of these clips because I think it's the best way to just have this retrospective about the stuff that really stuck out about Serial and really influenced the narrative and just taught me things about my trade as a lawyer and also just about people. It's been hugely influential. So I hope people are enjoying this and like the clips and maybe thinking of some of the clips they like better because there's so many clips. The coordinates. Oh, this is so good. Okay, so let me set the context. We're in episode 5. They're going through the route. They're trying to figure out the cell phone records, and it's one of those things where the evidence you're looking at is so faulty and so weak and so hard to even navigate through that you just feel like you're in jello and you can't find any solid grounding. And this is a great representation of that from Sarah.
This over. Why the Patapsco story at all? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Plus, it's like trying to, I'm trying to think of an analogy of, like, what the uselessness of what we're trying to do by recreating something that doesn't fit. It's like like trying to plot, the coordinates of someone's dream or something, where it's just like, but wait, that doesn't.
And I use that all the time. I mean, that for me, that created such a great word picture of trying to plot the coordinates of someone else's dream. And I've used that, I mean, not in official pleadings or something. That's helped me understand some of my cases because sometimes you have these, in product liability cases, they go back decades, and the basis for, again, I'm coming from the defense perspective, but the basis sometimes for the identification of products requires jumping through so many hoops to get to some really substantial identification that it really feels like you're plotting the coordinates of someone else's dream, because it's like, well, this guy said that this person told him and he knew it this way and he remembers this, but it's hard to explain. So, but I totally feel what she was saying. And this Patapsco, see, I knew I'd have a problem talking about the park that starts with P. So I'm going to call it the park, formerly known as a name I can't pronounce that I'll call P. It's just this story in there about them going there and smoking pot. And does anyone even say pot anymore? It just shows them a old fogey. But anyway, and this conversation they have, and about Adnan talking about the crime, and it's very odd because the richness of detail in that part of Jay's story is pretty significant. And I've always wondered what that came from, whether Jay was somehow involved and someone else was there saying that and Anon was just put in place of them in the story, or if Jay had something like that memory some other time, or he saw it in a movie or something like that. I don't know. But the idea of plotting the coordinates of someone else's dream is a great one. So we have that, and then, oh, this is a great one too. There's so much going on in this clip about the evidence, right? This whole idea the prosecution had of, well, we've got Jay, and maybe Jay's a problem, but we've got these cell phone records, and somehow, some way, they get to us to get Anon. And this is a continuing theme, and maybe many of you probably haven't followed along as this case has progressed. There's been more briefing and appeals. But one of the themes that Uric said in his Intercept interview back in January is that, well, kind of all we need to do is show that Anon's the guy, and if the timeline's different, whatever, if Anon's the guy and that part of Jay's story stays consistent, that's enough. And they suggested in the recent briefing that, the Asia McLean earlier, if she's a alibi, doesn't really matter because the state would have just had a different timeline, which feels really fundamentally unfair, and I think Anon captures the feelings of many of us as we heard it.
Key moments when they do support his version of that night. But what about the rest of the day?
It's like it's so unfair to me because it's like it never the etched in stoneness of the phone records. It never goes in my way. It's just whenever it's proven what the prosecutor's saying, it's like the Moses tablet. Whenever it's something I'm saying, it's like the Holy Grail. Oh, we don't know where it is. We're not sure if it really exists. It kind of floats away. But that's not cool though, because now what you're saying is that you can use the cell phone records when it benefits me.
That was the 30-minute cutoff.
There's so much going on in there. First of all, the metaphors are great because they're real metaphors, but almost mixed metaphors. But that is so great. So when the prosecution comes up with something, it's stone tablets, handed to Moses by Almighty God. And when I come up with something, it's the Holy Grail. It's missing. We don't know where it is. Not a perfect argument. Sometimes mixed metaphors are almost more powerful than real ones. And there's something about that that's just, I found so compelling. I thought, this guy has a great mind to come up with that. But the thing that's so great about that scene is he gets cut off. So he's in prison for 15 years. He's finally getting to tell his side of the story, and he doesn't even get to complete a sentence. And I just think that's not only part of law, but life that strikes me, and maybe why I wanted to be a lawyer for so long, especially a trial lawyer, is that assuming there's a fair trial, right, with juries and time, and you can have witnesses, how many times in life do you really get a fair hearing? I mean, really get a fair hearing from your spouse, from your children, from your parents? Like, people sit down, they just tell me everything, and they have instructions to follow. It just doesn't work that way in life, usually. And again, when I was saying earlier about how a story can teach me something, can be truer than the truth, right? Because in an encapsulated, like highly fortified, strong form, it shows me the truth about some things in life. And here's the thing here, that it's hard to really get a fair shake for other people to see where you're coming from. And this is just putting it, 2x4 to the head. This is what's happened in the case, and right now he's in prison trying to tell his story to journalists, and he can't even finish the thought. So I really have been struck by that since. The opposite of the truth. Okay. We couldn't talk about serial podcasts or anything serial related or Adnan Syed's case without talking about Cristina Gutierrez's cross-examination. Now, if anyone's interested in hearing more about it or about cross-examination, I do have a YouTube channel. I think if you put Brendan Kenny into YouTube or something like that and put Adnan Syed, I have a playlist, Adnan Syed, and it's about 19 videos I've done about this case. And I do talk about cross-examination. Specifically, I do a mock cross-examination of Don and showing how I think cross-examination should be done. It's not anything I invented, but it's kind of a better way to do it. It's one fact per question. You don't argue with the witness. It's much more satisfying than listening to Christine Gutierrez. But I do like this little snippet I'm going to play about the opposite of the truth about her during her cross-examination of Jay.
And your act of showing them that place, those were lies, weren't they?
They were not true.
They weren't the truth. What's the opposite of the truth?
What's the opposite of the truth? And just the thing about it is it's sort of poetic, but totally ineffective. Her cross-examination couldn't have been more ineffective and turned the jury in Jay's favor, as when we get to a few of the clips from the jury later, you'll see. Oh, yes, okay. Here's another thing. This is my pet peeve about how many of us look at a criminal defendant or a plaintiff or a civil defendant or someone involved is we a lot of times we think what would be the right reaction, maybe my own reaction, and the person doesn't have that. We say something terrible as a result, and we don't consider the context, both the baseline for the person, how would they normally react, and also the people around them. And Hayes' disappearance is a great example, and this clip, I think, puts it in a great light.
To be fair to Adnan, if this really was his reaction, then he wasn't the only one. The seriousness of Hayes' disappearance didn't start sinking in with her friends for a while. School was canceled on January 14th and 15th because of the ice storm. Then the weekend came. Then Monday was Martin Luther King Day. So the kids didn't all reconvene at school until the following Tuesday. All of Hayes' friends I spoke to said they initially thought Hay had either run off someplace with her new boyfriend Don, or, this was another rumor that a lot of people talked about at the time, that she'd run off to California. Friends said she talked about that sometimes, that her dad, or maybe it was her stepdad, was in California, and she wanted to go there. They told...
And I won't even get to whether Don was the source of some of those rumors to begin with. It could be. I'm a broken record about this 7-hour conversation that he had with Debbie and what went on doing that, and the fact that it wasn't ever investigated. But we're still going on, and I hope people aren't too bored. If you are, you can just, get off, come back on if you want or not. But these are just the ones that I found the most compelling, influenced me the most, and again, it's a highly subjective sort of decision. The next one is, all right. I'm not really good at pointing out, and I don't like to use the word tropes because it sounds bad, but when there's something that happens in a story that's evocative of a theme that is easy to happen. Yeah, we're all wondering about the 7-hour conversation. Yes, and hopefully more will come out about that. But there's a moment that happens in movies and stories, I don't know what to call it, but it's like a call to action. And when someone affirms that what you're doing is the right thing, and you're like, let's go, yes, this is right. And this is a great example of this with Deidre from the evidence, from the Innocence Project. I love it, love it.
But the future never came. They never tested those cells for DNA. Then Mario didn't like the report on the fibers. 2 fibers, one reddish that was found near Hayes' head, and one that I think was fluorescent blue, it's a little hard to tell from the report, that was found underneath her in the soil. Mario didn't think they were tested against enough samples. For instance, they weren't tested against a rope that was also found right near the body.
Ooh, I think I got a little more than I intended.
Be able to compare
these questions, you know what I mean? Like, do you guys independently feel like, no, something went wrong here? Or is this just like, well, we're sort of humoring you, the reporter?
No, I would look at this as this. I would have a team on this case saying, keep going.
I just love that because I think a lot of us we're going along with Sarah, and I'm experiencing her back and forth, and she's doubting herself, and she's it's going around, and Deidre's just like, yeah, you're totally right, we're totally on it, and Calvary's to the rescue. I just love it. It's and again, I know it's a moment in films, and I can't pinpoint another example, but I love it when it happens, and it's great that it happened in real life here. Oh, this is a hard one when we start hearing from the jurors. Isn't that painful? And the first one, Stella, who I love how she talks. I love everything about her, but it's so disappointing.
Okay, my name is Miss Stella Armstrong, Baltimore, Maryland.
And you were a juror on the Adnan Syed case, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so that's just her opening. And here's when she learns that Jay never went to jail.
Like I said, it's been a while, but I remember the one young man who was supposedly his friend, who had enabled him to move the body.
Right.
And that struck me that why would you admit to doing something that drastic if you hadn't done it? You know what I mean? For what reason? What was he going to gain from that? He still had to go to jail.
Yeah. Actually, he didn't go to jail.
Oh, he didn't? The friend didn't?
No.
Oh.
He walked.
That's strange. That's strange.
Isn't that strange? That's strange. I don't know, and I actually, in the short amount of time when I thought of it, I couldn't look it up. That use of strange, it reminds me of like something like Beowulf or some sort of old Middle English sort of evocative of mist and weirdness and oddness and faint stench of evil. And that's really wild. I mean, it's sad, that she was under that impression. And here's the other thing too that was sad to me, was her impression of what Cristina Gutierrez was arguing, and apparently what she was arguing, which is a terrible argument. I just can't believe it. Anyway. Oh.
This attorney tried to make him, well, basically she was trying to show that Jay killed her and was blaming it on Adnan. But that's what I remember. Nothing led us to believe that he had a motive to kill Miss Lee.
Yeah.
That really stayed with me because she was so adamant that he was a liar.
Right.
So here's what happened. Okay, and let me just say something about a jury. No one's ever going to have a perfect jury. There are juries with trouble. But this jury wasn't an evil jury. Let's put it this way. This jury wasn't one. This wasn't a jury like in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Where they send the African-American guy away even though they know he didn't do it. So it's not that kind of jury. I'm not saying they weren't biased, but they weren't evil in that way. And so whatever their biases, whatever their understanding were in there, and they were presented with an alternative story, was that Jay did it. Terrible. And this idea that you can just poke holes in the prosecution and expect a jury to go with it, not a good one. So I mean, and that just made me so sad when I heard that. I thought, oh, that's the argument. It wasn't her fault. She came to the conclusion that the point about Jay being a liar was because he did it, which terrible. This case any defense of this case had to be about a rush to judgment by the law enforcement, singling Adnan out and a real investigation not being done. And Jay should have been somehow made as part of the victim or something like that. That would be the way to do it. But the idea of him doing it, terrible. And it comes out later, she actually said to the court that was her theory. So it's not just the jury's fault, which I thought it was. And here's a terrible, terrible, terrible tip of legal advice that Sarah got from some of her lawyer friends who, unfortunately, lawyers say things like that. Listen.
One defense attorney I talked to said that boringness can be a strategy. She said lawyers know that people can only pay close attention for so long, 45 minutes, an hour, before they start to flag.
Not when your client's on trial for murder and the other side has a story. You don't bore the jury into not listening to you. Terrible, terrible, terrible advice. That's from episode 8. There was some bad advice that Sarah got from some of her lawyer friends. It's just common. I'm not trying to bash people. There's a lot of bad lawyering out there. Okay, and this, trust me, and you don't need to tell me that. Again, in a former life, I worked for cases involving the California Department of Corrections, and also before that, the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. And this idea of bad evidence, it is a thing. People talk this way. But what I love is what struck me wasn't that that Trainum here was talking about the idea the police have a bad evidence, that they have that. But I love Sarah's reaction. I wanted to, I felt like a brotherly affection for her at this time. I wanted to just hug her and say, "You're so wonderful. Listen to this. This is so good."
To push, how much do you want to create quote unquote bad evidence?
But like, there's no such thing. Like this is
an actual term. It's called bad evidence, right? You don't want to do something if it's going to go against your theory of the case.
But then I don't get that. I mean, that's like my father used to always say, all facts are friendly. Like, shouldn't that be more true for a cop than for anyone else? Like, you can't pick and choose.
Rather than trying to get to the truth, what you're trying to do is build your case and make it the strongest case possible.
But how can it be a strong case, and how can he be a great witness if there's stuff that's not true or unexplained?
It's so great. Sarah, there's this quality, and I don't know what to call it. It's the sort of thing you see sometimes, and I don't mean this as a dig or anything, but you see sometimes in teenage movies, like I think of the movie like Can't Hardly Wait, where there's this incredible, powerful, endearing inarticulateness. And that's what you had in that moment where she was stumbling over her words, but it made it all so much more powerful. It was kind of like speaking the truth to power. And I don't want to say Jim Trainum. I don't know that he was defending that position. I don't know that. It's certainly a common one in law enforcement, but I love the way she did it, and if he was defending it, you notice how he backed off. Because what do you say to that? I mean, and people don't get called on it. The best possible case. Well, first of all, here's the thing. That's the job of a lawyer. That's not the job of law enforcement. I'm just going to get off my soapbox in a minute. But going through this case, you see this idea that somehow cops are like glorified lawyers, and they decide what the relevant evidence is that they want in, and that's the stuff that gets to the other side, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. So, because at that point, it's not an adversarial system. You have one side, right, the cops, and you have a criminal defendant. There's no equality there. The lawyers aren't even involved. So this building up the best possible case is a really bad one, but I love how the defense that she made. Okay, this is the most disappointing moment for me, for the jury, and also for defense counsel, that the jury was allowed, that defense counsel didn't do anything to inoculate the jury from the idea that Adnan should testify. Very sad. Listen to this, what the juror said that she wanted about Adnan, what she wanted Adnan to do at trial.
The defendant when they're deliberating. Did it bother you guys as a jury that Adnan himself didn't testify, didn't take the stand?
Yes, it did.
That's Lisa Flynn, one of the jurors.
That was huge. I think, yeah, that was huge. We all kind of like gasped, like we were all just like blown away by that. Why not? If you're a defendant, why would you not get up there and defend yourself and try to prove that the state is wrong, that you weren't there, that you're not guilty? We were trying to be so open-minded. It was just like, get up there and say something. Try to persuade, even though it's not your job to persuade us, but I don't know.
Yes, just like if it's a civil war and there's an army lined up against you with cannons, with grape shot, and you're one person, you should pick up your gun and your bayonet and charge, for God and country. I mean, it's the sad thing is that the jury could be allowed to go into deliberations without having arguments against that. I'm not going to go into it, but Jerry Spence and a lot of defense lawyers and others have great arguments that they try to do in voir dire, the jury selection part, which maybe they weren't allowed to do here. But you have to get that in to see, so people can empathize what it's about being a criminal defendant with the whole power of the state against you, and this rush to judgment, which should have been relatively easy to show. It's so sad that they went into deliberations like that. And 15 years later, that's what they think about it, that he should have gotten up and defended himself. Well, this is what it's like to be a criminal defendant, as Anon shows. And I don't mean to sound so opinionated. It's just, for me, just from a persuasion standpoint, it's so sad that this is what the jury thought about the case, regardless of what you think the outcome should have been. But here's what Anon says about being at trial.
I'm going to somewhere, but I'm going to the club. That doesn't mean that, it's indicative of my desire to commit murder or something, but you never get a chance to speak. You never get a chance to say anything.
Right, so what would it accomplish for him to be on the stand for a little bit of time, and but still, it would just be another opportunity to go after him. There's two clips that, for me, show the power of good memories, of good things happening, that happened at a really traumatic time in his life, and many of us that have experienced traumatic things, death in the family and stuff, can, I think, have this. I love how this is shown, so I'm going to show you these, and it's one of them's in Anon's voice and the other isn't, but it hit me, and I think about it all the time. Here.
Often when Anon tells stories about this time, he zeroes in on some small moment when someone was kind to him.
There was someone in plain clothes. He stuck his head in the door, and he said, "Hey, man, just have faith."
I love that. I mean, and these are vignettes of people who did things, who didn't do it to be known, will never know their names, and they did things when it was at no benefit to them whatsoever. And the spirit moved, I guess. I don't mean to, get into religion, whatever, but it reminds me of the statement, whatsoever you do to the least of my brethren, you do for me, even if it's a cup of cold water, given to one of them. And that's what I felt when I heard that. And then this one too. Small things, but done with great love. And this one about the other people who were kind to him.
Also, the white lady who was driving the cruiser that took him downtown. She was polite. There was the sheriff's deputy who looked like Jed Hirsch, who slipped him a candy bar.
And those are beautiful little vignettes. And the thing is at the very, near the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about good memories and memory, how important it is to have those to hang on to. And those were so important, I could just tell in Anon's life that he had those. And I've had that experience too. Again, a story brought those to mind for me in a way that if you just, came up to me and said, "Hey, Brendan, do you know that memories, good memories are important, you should hang on to them, and they're really powerful?" I'd say, "Oh yeah, sure." But then I hear that, and it stirs something. And the other thing is, probably, the thing I really identify with in Anon is being, and I don't say this because I've had any terrible persecution in my life, but just run-of-the-mill stuff. But the idea of someone forming this judgment of you that is so flawed, so wrong, and anything you do just makes it worse. So remember when Anon tried to say something at sentencing to the judge, and he couldn't figure out what to say because he didn't want to get the judge mad, and his public defender said, "Don't say you're innocent," and so he did a mismatch, and then the judge says this to him. Oh. Can you imagine hearing that? This thing you're just going to hear, can you imagine hearing this if you're completely innocent of the crime? Imagine.
He said to Anon, "You planned it." Quote, "You used that intellect. You used that physical strength. You used that charismatic ability of yours that made you the president or the king or the prince of your prom. You used that to manipulate people. And even today, I think you continue to manipulate even those that love you, as you did to the victim. You manipulated her to go with you to her death.
So imagine what you would feel if someone said that to you, and it's all untrue. I mean, that's heavy. That's heavy. That just hits you. And I love this part. I identify with this approach that Anand took to why he's in prison, maybe more than anything else in the show. I feel it. It's so true to me. And it seems so right, true humility, where he's telling the truth about his responsibility. For me, if there's anything that spoke to his character, it's this. And my computer's being slow.
I never should have let someone hold my car. I never should have let someone hold my phone. You know, I never should have been friends with people, you know, who, I don't, who else can I blame but myself?
Well, you could blame Jay if you think he's lying.
I mean, yeah, but, him, the police, the prosecutors, but, sure, what happened to me happened to me. I had nothing to do with this, right? But at the end of the day, I had to take some responsibility, you know what I mean? If you don't really know the things that my younger brother went through, you know, what my family goes through, you know, and, at the end of the day, if I had been, you know, just like a good Muslim, you know what I mean, someone who didn't do any of these things, you know what I mean, then, it's something that really weighs heavily on.
I don't think I can really add to that. And then, okay, I'm back to Christina Gutierrez. So, this is a sad thing about it, too. She knows there's going to be bias against Adnan because of his background, whatever. So, instead of really creating empathy, she lectures the jury about all this stuff, including what Pakistan is. You got to listen to this if you forget. Oh, man.
Probably explains why she spent what seemed to me a nutty amount of time during her opening talking about what an immigrant is, what a mosque is, what Pakistan is, quote, a country formed in the Arab world in the tip of the landmass called Asia.
Oh, I don't know how you could call, maybe I'm totally wrong, how you could call Pakistan the Arab world, except the people are Muslims, but anyway, it's an interesting way to do it. Oh, Goots, yeah, I know. Oh. And, okay, unless anyone doubts the way I did and wants to give her the benefit of the doubt, not to speak ill of the dead, but just to say about what a terrible argument was. She tells the judge, oh, our whole defense is about Jay doing it. And I know this wasn't in the presence of the jury, but terrible argument. Just listen. This is going to get nicer. We're going to end on an up note.
Judge, I'd just like to be heard. It is our entire defense theory to make Jay was the person who committed this crime.
Entire defense. All right. Terrible argument. Terrible argument. Tipping your hand on... Okay, another piece of terrible advice, you know. Terrible, terrible, terrible lawyering advice about cross-examination. I know a lot of lawyers do it, so don't hate me, but just let me have 10 seconds to say why it's terrible, terrible advice.
Yeah.
Right.
To give you an idea, in Jay's first and second tape statements to detectives, he tells them different... As another defense attorney explained to me, during cross-examination, you don't want to tie each point up in a bow in the moment. You don't want to tip your hand, because then the other side might come back with questions on redirect examination that could undo what you've just laid out.
Well, that's true if you're trying to argue like Christina Gutierrez and have the witness, you know, say he's a liar, a cheater, and a bum on cross-examination, bully them into saying something like that, then yeah, of course the other side's going to fix it on redirect. But if you're trying to establish facts, one fact per question, in a way that he can't argue with, nothing can be done on redirect realistically. So that's just a big, big cop-out for doing good cross. So anyway, that's my pet peeve. Maybe you don't care. Okay. Oh, this hit me hard. We're getting towards the end. So if you're sticking in there, like, oh my gosh, we're almost at an hour. We will end. But you're going to have to indulge me for a second. I'm going to play this clip, and I'm going to read about a page out of the book Brothers Karamazov. So just a page from Alushka's funeral speech, which you don't have to have read the rest of the book. Anyway.
I remember, especially in middle school and elementary, more into middle school, that when we would get picked for sports, Adnan was very athletic, tall, good-looking, kind of like the jock role, and I was more chubby, short, kind of the nerdy, kind of role. So he never made me feel that. He always made sure I got picked for the team. If other kids made fun of me on my athletic performance, or I couldn't shoot, or I couldn't kick the ball, and they would start poking fun, he would always have my back and kind of tell them stop it, or kind of watch out for me, kind of like an older brother. And I'll never forget that.
So memory from childhood, a powerful memory. And that struck me. I was never good at sports, and people did the same to me as Anand did, based on that, my brothers and other people. And the thing that is so powerful is that this isn't an example of extreme bullying, where Anand saw terrible behavior and he had to get up and do the right thing. This was petty life, and half the problem, in my experience, with being bad at sports wasn't so much the teasing from other people, just the experience of being bad at sports. Being bad at something you're expected to be good at and you have to do, and it's very difficult, very difficult. So anytime someone could make that better is great. And, in this case, he didn't need to fix some terrible situation. It was just part of who he was. And that was a memory that this kid took his whole life. And I totally understand that. And there's something about memory, about a good memory. And I had to read... oh, no. That shut down. Well, I'm going to find it. I had to read a page out of the Brothers Karamazov because it talks about that in a way that's better than I could ever say it, and so I'm going to read it. Of course, the browser window closed, but meanwhile, as I find that, I'll play the Bowels of New York Courthouse quote, which, again, is really beautifully evocative of a scene when they were going to find the cell phone user agreement, and they had to go find it in an old class action case that was way in the basement of the New York courthouse. This is so much fun. On an up note, so much fun.
It looked like the Mad Hatter's archive room. Totally. Were you the first humanoid who'd come down in 15 years?
Yeah, they were like, "What news do you bring?"
That I just love it because it does bring out kind of like almost a science fiction feel of some place people are stuck somewhere on a space station, or they're there and they they're sitting there and someone comes and they haven't talked to anyone in years. It's a funny little statement. Okay, I'm going to read the part from Brothers Karamazov about childhood and memory. Okay. You must know that there is nothing higher and stronger and more wholesome and good in life in the future than some good memory. Especially a memory of childhood, of home. People talk to you a great deal about your education, but some good, sacred memory preserved from childhood is perhaps the best education. If a man carries many such memories with him into life, he is safe to the end of his days. And if one has only one good memory left in one's heart, even that may sometime be the means of saving us. Perhaps we may even grow wicked later on, may be unable to refrain from a bad action, may laugh at men's tears and at those people who say, as Kolya did just now, I want to suffer for all men. and may even jeer spitefully at such people. But however bad we may become, which God forbid, yet when we recall how we buried Elisha, how we loved him in his last days, and how we have been talking like friends all together at this stone, the cruelest and most mocking of us, if we do become so, will not dare to laugh inwardly at having been kind and good at this moment. What's more, perhaps, that one memory may keep him from great evil, and he will reflect and say, yes, I was good and brave and honest then. Let him laugh to himself, that's no matter. A man often laughs at what's good and kind. That's only from thoughtlessness. But I assure you, boys, that as he laughs, he will say at once in his heart, no, I do wrong to laugh, for that's not a thing to laugh at. And so that's what I see, that for him or for whatever the case is, that's something that can never be taken away, a good memory from childhood. And it I know this person who spoke, and Sarah said he only spoke to her anonymously with his, robotic voice because of that thing that Adnan does that Adnan probably doesn't even remember. And that's the beauty of good in life, is that a lot of times we don't remember doing the best things we do. Anyway, that's very philosophical, I guess, but I couldn't stop from that. And this is and I don't know what this is called too, when someone does this in a story, when they face something, their fear, something getting them down, and they overcome. It's courage, but I'm sure there's a term for it. This is so good at the end of episode 12. So we're really getting near the end, but this is so great. Anon.
But on Saturday, Adnan finally gave Deirdre the go-ahead to file the motion to test the DNA. It was an emotional decision for him.
If there's anything about my case, man, I want to know it. You know what I'm saying? No one has to. I don't want anyone to be able to say, well, he didn't want to know, so boom, we went and found out. No, I want to know. And so I called Miss Deirdre. I said, look, Miss Deirdre, I want to do the testing. Man, I'm the one that asked for this. You guys had it sitting for 16 years, and you never tested it. It's impossible, man, for it to be sitting there for 16 years, and you guys never tested it. So that's fine. So I want to test it.
Yeah.
I want to see what it's been. There's nothing about my case that I'm afraid of.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's nothing about this case he's afraid of. What does he have to be afraid of? The worst thing that could ever happen happened. And he's walked through, the valley of darkness. And, now he's kind of found a voice. So it's really, and it's part of the hero's journey type thing. I will say this, something that struck me, and I'm on the defense side, civil defense side, but when someone's representing a plaintiff, it's very important that they don't make their client out to be a victim. Yes, this terrible thing happened to him or her, and that was bad, and they've suffered, but they're the hero of this story. They've come through this tribulation. They have walked through the valley of death. They have been in the fiery furnace. I know I'm just coming out with all sorts of biblical stuff. And they're here now, stronger for it. And not to say that we do evil so that good may result, or that the people who did the evil are, were good people because this great result happened. But this person dealt with adversity, and here he is now. And, to contrast them with the scared kid he was at 17 is amazing. So I love that. And I'm just going to leave it at that. There's 2 more clips, but, I don't think I can improve on that. So I don't know if this was the format you were expecting, but it seemed the best one for me, just to take those vignettes, those moments that happened in this story, and celebrate how great the first episode of Serial was, and maybe acknowledge that art and movies and music and all that can really make the world a better place, make our lives better, and we can learn from it. And season 2 of Serial's coming, and so let's be ready for it, enjoy it, and well, you'll hear about the podcast that I'm going to be doing. I won't take any longer than I need to here. You can find me on Twitter at Kenny, Kenny, Brendan, at Kenny, Brendan. And once we get a little farther on the podcast, we will we will have our own Twitter account, and we'll need help. Not help money. And we don't want your dime. We just want your time. So if you're at all interested in maybe some of the angles I'm coming from, and there's going to be 2 other lawyers involved, and also a radio guy who's done it for years, who will be doing the announcing and editing, and he's going to be doing a lot of great stuff. Get in touch with me. I've got a lot of plans for how you could help just by spreading the message or taking whatever skills you have to making the show good. But this Periscope shouldn't be about me. So I will sign out and get to do all the other stuff I need to do before I go to bed. Clean up around the house. And I hope you have a great night. Thanks for staying up. I hope it was worth it. And hopefully I heard from you. Have a great one.